Hello and welcome. You're watching Global Insight with me, Young. From Arirang News Centre in Seoul, we speak with experts from around the world to hear their views on issues making headlines. There could be 1 billion poor people in the world by 2030, a quarter due to the COVID-19 pandemic. That's according to the United Nations Development Programme's Human Development Report released this month. While we've been told that the pandemic doesn't discriminate as it spreads, we found it has in fact struck the most vulnerable people disproportionately when it comes to the socio-economic impact. While some have done well out of the pandemic, merely adjusting to commuting online and even profiting from soaring tech stocks, low-paid workers will let go, those in services don't know if they'll have jobs to go back to, and children in low-income households can't go to school, nor can they catch up digitally with their peers. Even as governments plan on reopening their economies, it's clear that not everybody will be on the same pace of recovery, and some societies may even fall further behind, affecting generations to come. To delve into this issue, we have joining us today Dr. Kaushik Basu, a professor of economics at Cornell University and former chief economist at the World Bank. It's lovely to have you back. A very warm welcome to you. How are you today?
My pleasure, Surang. It's a pleasure to be back.
Thank you. And well, let's go straight into the questions. Now, we're talking about recovery as the vaccines are being rolled out, but countries for the most part aren't expecting recovery to really pick up until enough of their populations are vaccinated. And even then, it's quite clear that recovery won't be equal across sectors and across societies. And you were, of course, on the advisory panel for the UN Development Programme's annual Human Development Report, which recently estimated that the Human Development Index, which measures education, health, living standards, it's set to decline this year for the first time since the concept was developed in 1990. So in planning this recovery, how do you think governments should really use this time to minimise the damage and prepare for a strong recovery once they do reopen?
It is indeed alarming that we are going to see a decline in Human Development Index. And basically, it's two of the three items that you just mentioned which will cause it. Income. GDP growth, we know, has been negative in the third quarter of this year. Very few countries showing positive growth. China, Vietnam, Turkey, a few. Most countries are showing negative growth, so GDP is going to be hurt. In terms of standard of living, life expectancy, that's going to take another knock. So between these two, it's going to be worse. Where do we expect this to go, and how will the poor people be able to handle this? The UNDP is concerned about this. The World Bank is concerned about this. This is indeed a humanitarian concern. You know, there are two sides to the problem that we have to separate out and take on. One is the immediate problem. Here, you don't worry about what's going to happen 5 years down the road, though this pandemic was so major, it is going to affect the structure of the world and the global economy. But there is an immediate problem. As you pointed out, number of people in poverty, below the poverty line, is going to increase. Number of people who are deprived in fundamental ways is going to increase around the world. And even though the vaccine is now, in principle, not just in sight, but available in the richer countries, it will take 6 months, 8 months for this to begin to spread, and the damage will continue. And for the very poor, there isn't that space. The first set of interventions you want is the immediate one. Shore up poor people's buying power, income. And for that, you may have to beg, borrow, do whatever you need to do. Print money. You can't do that for too long because you can't spark off inflation. But for a short period, just shore up the buying power of the poor. You are, in fact, beginning to see this in richer countries. In the United States, now there is talk that they are going to hand over money, which they had done right at the beginning, that had dropped, but to start that up now. In the poorer countries, Asia, a lot of South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, too little of that. And let me point out one more thing. From countries where we have data, like in the United States, we know that people in the bottom half of the income are being hit much worse than people in the top half. Top half, people are not, their standard of living is not really getting affected. It's the bottom half is dropping. We don't know enough about Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, about South Asia. We don't have that kind of detailed data, but it is probably a similar pattern. The bottom segment is taking a bigger hit And these are poorer people, more vulnerable people. So the first effort, and this has to be a global effort, because especially sub-Saharan Africa, they don't have enough fiscal space to be able to give money to the poorest people. So there needs to be global effort to reach out to them. Once you've done that, you have to think of the long run, because the global landscape is changing. The technology sector will look different. Pharmaceuticals will be big. Other sectors will be smaller, and countries will have to adjust to this. That's the longer run problem that we will have to take on.
And you just mentioned the burgeoning presence of the digital sector, and well, from Alexa, Siri, Google Home, or Samsung Bixby waking us up to enabling entire smart cities, the IT giants of the world, they're really dominating our lives and making a very pretty profit out of it as well. And we're, of course, constantly feeding them data ourselves, as they basically own any major platform that we used. And well, given this winner-take-all environment, from profits to income, can we really continue to believe in the trickle-down effect that some economists have been telling us about? Or should big tech really be taxed more now, more stringently, and also held accountable across borders?
Yeah, completely agree. But the technology of how we do all this will have to be very well designed. But I do believe that to sit back for trickle-down is a tragic attitude towards this. For very poor, first of all, it's not trickling down. And even if it is going to trickle down over the next 2 years, you can't wait for that. Big tech you mentioned, big tech is indeed a sector where people are upset about. It's a vital sector, but seeing it prosper when the world is suffering is annoying. But there's one more sector I should mention. The pharmaceutical sector is very similar. I think it's going to become big, major. It's important, we can't deny that. But we want the benefits of that, the digital sector, the pharmaceutical sector, to spread across the world. What do you do with this? Here is what one has to keep in mind. First of all, I believe you have to tax them. You have to tax, take part of their profit and transfer. One particular method that the world has used in the past, this is slightly technical, but let me explain, which we have used in the past, but which I don't think is going to work very well. This is the use of antitrust law. In the United States, in Europe, there is a lot of talk. Europe is taking some steps to break them up. The purpose of antitrust law is to take these mega firms and break them up into many small firms. The reason why I feel this old method, which was used in the United States from 1890, from the time of the Sherman Act, it has been used in South Korea from 1981, antitrust law, that will not work. And the reason is, for these firms, the technology firms that you're talking about, the advantage is the size. You cannot have 200 Amazons where you get onto each platform to search for what you want. The whole advantage is having one of them. As soon as you recognize that, you realize that the old legislative technique of breaking them up into many is not going to work. What do? Your question had a little bit of that answer, which I sympathize with greatly. You have to transfer some of their big incomes, take from them and distribute it. Two ways of doing that. One is indeed taxation. You have to tax the rich, the big income people. You can do it heavily. And this also, mainstream economics, conservative economics' view is that people will stop working if you tax them heavily. Well, if you're taxing the super rich very heavily, even if they work a little bit less, it's not going to damage the world. And I'll tell you, as long as they get a certain segment of that income, which is really marginal income at the top, they will continue to work. We don't have to worry about that. So you should tax. But there's another more radical, different prescription. It does not matter if these big tech companies make a lot of profit, if that profit goes into many, many pockets. So one suggestion which I think in today's world we have to seriously think of is having laws that force big tech companies to have their shares dispersed widely. So it must not be 20 people, 100 people, 200 people owning a disproportionate amount of shares. The shares will have to be widely held. After that, if these companies make mega profits, from the income distribution, it does not matter because these profits are going to be widely shared by lots of people. So This is a serious problem, and it's a problem that we have to attend to. Otherwise, there will be political disruptions because inequality will continue to increase. But along with our heart and our passion, we have to design. Think of the laws that can be used, the regulatory framework that can be used. You do want to put a cap on the richest people's income, and you do want to put a floor below the poorest people so that the income distribution is much more manageable in the world.
Well, we just hope that politicians listen to your ideas. They're just making sure that the shares are more widely dispersed and that the whole society, which is really providing these companies with their digital leverage, are also gaining from it as well. And very much needed, we really do need these regulatory reforms, these innovations that you mentioned. And well, it seems right now the most productive industries need minimal human labour due to the digital transformation again. And of course, workers in hospitality, tourism services and those employed in informal sectors, they'll be worst hit by the recovery. And how should then governments and businesses really address these displaced workers when they're no longer productive in the new normal?
You will need direct support for them in the beginning, till you begin to adjust them into the newer sectors that come up where they may be needed. But there is no getting away from the fact that the government has a big responsibility at this juncture. You know, I am not in the camp that believes that we should hold back technology because modern technology is displacing labor. In itself, it would be a matter of joy if all the boring drudge work is taken over by machines and robots. But if every time work is taken over by a machine, a worker's income becomes a rich person's share or a rich person's income from patents, that is the tragedy. When the wage disappears from the hands of these people, boring work being taken away by machines is not a bad thing at all. But for that, we need to restructure the way income goes into people's hands. And there is another related idea. I do personally believe that not just dispersed shareholding within companies, but a certain fraction of the nation's profit ought to be taken and distributed among the nation's population, so that when there are a few big companies making mega profits, a part of that profit is collectively owned as shares by the population of the country. For this, you need the government to play a role. So I feel we are today at a stage like during the Industrial Revolution, early 19th century up to 1850s, we needed major reforms of laws, new kinds of regulations. That's the reason why the technological innovations of the Industrial Revolution helped mankind instead of destroying society. We are at that kind of a juncture. We need big ideas to be brought in like we did from the 1750s to 1850s, new regulatory framework, so that the technological changes, which are in itself benefits to mankind, humankind, the technological change in big tech, in pharma, in medicine, but the benefits of that we need to distribute better, for which novel regulations are needed.
So really renewing that social contract, reminding people that there is a social contract, and that's partly why they have prospered as well. Developing countries, so they need all the finances they can get, as you mentioned, to support their citizens through these economic, social and health implications of the pandemic. But as ever, they face this very ridiculous debt crisis that really stops them from doing anything that could really get them out of the woods. So how should debt reduction protocols like the G20 framework that they have be changed effectively to really help countries access the finances that they so need at this point?
Suyong, it's important to recognize that in normal circumstances, you don't want to too quickly jump in and go for debt forgiveness, because if you do that too many times, the lenders hesitate to lend because they worry that 1 year later there will again be debt forgiveness and I won't get it back. But today is a very special situation. I feel today's juncture in the world with the COVID pandemic, the way it hit us, this is a time for debt forgiveness. And this is not going to set a precedence that we will do this repeatedly. So I am very pleased that the G20's common framework is talking about one of those big ideas in terms of debt forgiveness. And here is one particular thing that has to be kept in mind. Debt forgiveness, no lender wants to do unilaterally. I don't want to forgive the debt that I've given, even if I want to, because of a particular worry. I forgive the debt, and these poor countries are forced to pick up whatever money they have and give back money to the other person who has lent and is insisting that the money be given back. What is good about the G20 effort, the Common Framework effort, is this time China is in the team of debt forgiveness. So Europe, United States don't have to worry that we will forgive the debt and these people will simply pay back China. So it is one lender picking up money from other lenders. That's not the worry this time. So the way this is being planned, if it can be carried out, is going to give money in the hands of poor sub-Saharan African nations, some South Asian nations, little bits of Latin America, the poor countries in the world will get debt forgiveness. And that's the minimum that you can do in the middle of a pandemic where we human beings share a common identity, the common human identity. And this is a global effort that is much called for. I'm feeling a bit optimistic because the European Union, the G20, along with China playing a prominent role, seem to be taking it seriously.
Well, hopefully we will see that change, as you have mentioned. But, well, all this time, though, throughout the pandemic, we've seen inequality between societies as well as within them. And, well, when it comes to helping countries in need, do you think perhaps the Western world has been too restrained or even patronizing when it comes to development assistance? I mean, they do tend to keep projects rather limited in scale to agricultural technology, renovating community centres, and, of course, teaching about hygiene and transparency. Of course, these are very much needed, but shouldn't countries be perhaps doing what some countries like China has been doing and build infrastructure, roll out 5G, and really help with digital transition? I mean, in 2018, it was estimated that around $100 billion would be needed to close the gap in internet access in lower middle income countries. And that was estimated to be around 1% of the rather extraordinary fiscal programs announced around the world so far. So things like this, what are some practical ways to really fast-track economic development in these countries so that they actually become societies where people want to stay, work, and thrive in?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do believe that rich countries have been too tight-fisted. They have to give more support, direct support, including financial support, which hurts you a little bit, but a little bit. These are rich countries with that to reach out. And the reason is really that you're talking of digital connectivity, for instance. Digital connectivity is today's world what literacy used to be in our earlier world. For a country or a region not to have digital connectivity is like for a mass of people in an area not to be literate. In the days when the whole world was illiterate, there was no such thing as writing. It didn't matter, you're being illiterate. But when the world becomes literate, if you're illiterate, you won't be able to survive. And that's what's happening in the digital world. The digital connectivity is so important that countries that are being left behind are going to suffer in a way they did not suffer earlier, because the digital connectivity is going to be the crucial link around the world. And we do want rich countries to reach out. You know, as you were talking, I was thinking when the COVID began, and we spoke in the early days, say during March, April, the message that was coming from rich countries was giving messages that have lockdowns, follow all kinds of rules, to poorer countries that it should not spread. But along with that, there's the financial need. The economies are collapsing. They can't just lock down and sit back the poorest countries. They need money to keep their economy going. They need ideas to keep their economy going. There was too little of that flow that was taking place from rich countries to poor countries. But we are at a juncture now. We've suffered. It's 9-10 months of this kind of suffering. We have to reach out again. And again, really reminding ourselves of our common human roots. We all, at one level, come from Africa. We share that common humanity among us, and we have to use that, and rich countries have to reach out to poorer countries with not just with ideas and instructions, but with money. Financial support is needed right now.
Even the average person anywhere there in the world, I think we found during this pandemic that money matters. Having cash in your pocket really matters. And as you said, we really need to get those out to developing countries. And also vaccines. Now, we've seen clear vaccine nationalism take course in recent weeks. G7 countries have been hoarding millions upon millions of doses of mRNA vaccines, while the G77 will only be able to inoculate 1 in 10 people next year, according to the People's Vaccine Alliance. And well, what do you think should be done to help change the situation?
This is a very difficult problem because a lot of these vaccine distributions are prior contracts. So given out to big companies, they've developed rules who they are going to go give it to at what price. And a lot of it is going to be very, very unfair with the poorer countries not getting a share of that. And here I have to point out one thing about the COVID spread, that fortunately, through most of Asia and Africa, the COVID is turning out to be less damaging than in entire America, Latin America, North America, and Europe. So there is a natural immunity in Africa and Asia, which we are seeing. But it's also, these are regions which are much poorer, and you do need vaccines for people to battle, even if the incidence is lower. Here, I don't quite know what can be done because we have stepped into this problem. First step, once again, is you need financial support because many of these companies, the big companies, they are now doing a lot of play in terms of their global concerns, etc. There's a lot of writing going on by Pfizer, by Moderna, that they have global concerns and want to reach out. But a lot of it is fixed by prior contract and they'll have to make the money. What we should minimally do again is support poor countries financially so that they are able to give money, which is not their own money because they don't have the money. But the companies are going to get a disproportionate amount of this because the money will go to poorer countries and then they use that to buy a vaccine. The other thing is rules have to be made about the vaccine access. You may want to hold back from certain segments of the population that are immune and have these things be sent to poorer countries. But I'm afraid over here, some of the problems have been already structured in terms of contracts. So we have to try to get around that as much as possible. I am feeling a bit hopeful because there are several players now. Of course, Moderna and Pfizer are in the front line, but as AstraZeneca and others are coming in. So hopefully there will be a bigger play. One more thing, if I may point out. One reason why we have a vaccine shortage is by patent. You're not allowing others to produce vaccines. If you allow smaller countries and companies in developing countries to produce vaccines, they will be able to begin to manufacture quite quickly. So I feel this is one area where the patent rules have to be very, very quickly revised. I know that always raises hackles when you do this in retrospect, but this is, again, one of those special situations where you may have to give the right to smaller companies that are able to produce, but you're blocking them from producing by using patent rules. You have to review those as well.
Right, we really need to see our regulators and policymakers really respond in a very agile manner in this situation. And well, in going forward, what do you hope that the world will learn from this COVID-19 pandemic as we try to move ahead to a post-pandemic world in 2021? What kinds of ideas or changes do you hope to see happen?
One big one which I hope is the world has got globalized quite slowly from actually 100. Globalization is a process which has taken place over thousands of years. And after the end of World War II, globalization speeded up. But while the global economy was being globalized, the world politics has remained shamefully balkanized. Each country with its hyper-national interests has tried to run the world. That is not viable. And I think the pandemic is a reminder that we share a small global space together. And especially as the economy has got globalized, we can't live in a world where we just are concerned about our own small group of people. We have to develop institutions. I feel international organizations do have to play a very special role. And there are a few international leaders, not too many. I do see a few international leaders who keep reminding us that, of course, right now, the nation state is the building block of the world. We have to be attentive to our own nations, but we live in a globalized world. We have to worry about what's happening to our neighbors, what's happening to another country in another continent. We need to develop newer rules of global political engagement to keep in step with the global economy that we are beginning to live with. That is the big lesson that the COVID has given us, a rude reminder, and we should take that lesson so that we enter a better world by virtue of this rude shock that we have received.
Well, let's really hope to see that come into shape in 2021. Well, we've taken a lot of your time today, so this is where we'll wrap up the discussion. That was Dr. Kaushik Basu, Professor of Economics at Cornell University and former Chief Economist at the World Bank. Thank you again so much for your insights. It was lovely seeing you again, and we really hope you have a happy new year.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure talking to you, and all the best wishes to you and the people of Korea.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And to our viewers, thank you as always for watching.